In the Great Hall of the Galactic Academy, thousands of young minds from across the stars gathered to hear the words of Professor Zayara, who was known for her sharp mind and her unshakable authority on xenobiology. She had studied countless species from the farthest corners of known space, and she stood at the front of the vast lecture chamber with her scaled hands folded behind her back, her voice carrying with perfect clarity through the translators to every student present today. She promised to teach them about one of the strangest and most unpredictable species humanity. The room filled with chittering murmurs and the shifting sounds of alien bodies leaning forward on their seats, curious about the subject at hand. Professor Zayara began her lecture with certainty in her tone. She explained that humans were creatures of flesh easily harmed, fragile, compared to the armored hides of the Krath or the regenerative bodies of the Zune. She told her students that above all humans feared death, that their entire culture and history was filled with rituals of mourning, desperate attempts to delay the inevitable, and countless superstitions born from their terror of mortality. She described humans as a paradox of intellect and cowardice, gifted with creativity, yet shackled by the constant dread of their own end. The students nodded their many heads and took notes with claws, tendrils, or bioluminescent flashes depending on their species. Many seemed convinced by the professor's words, for her reputation was beyond doubt to them, and the way she spoke seemed to confirm the truth. But then something unexpected happened. From the back row of the hall came a sound that startled everyone, a low chuckle building into a laugh that seemed out of place in the solemn atmosphere of academic authority. All eyes turned toward the source of the sound. Sitting casually in the last row was the only human student in the class, a young man named Daniel. His face carried an amused grin, his arms crossed as if he had just heard a harmless joke instead of a lecture about the fear that supposedly defined his species. The laugh echoed for a moment too long, and it unsettled many of the alien students. They whispered among themselves, their voices dripping with confusion and disbelief. How could a human laugh at such a claim? Professor Zayara's eyes narrowed, her scales shifting slightly in irritation. She demanded to know why the human dared to mock her lecture. Daniel leaned forward, his expression calm, but his voice steady enough to reach the entire chamber. He said that it was funny because she was wrong. He said, humans did not fear death the way she described. They lived with it every day. They knew it was coming from the moment they were born, and so they learned to laugh at it, to push forward despite it, to cherish moments because of it. The chamber filled with silence, broken only by the confused clicks and hums of alien students trying to process his words. The professor raised her brow ridges and told him that denial was a common trait among fragile species. When faced with the truth, she accused him of arrogance and foolishness. But Daniel shook his head and replied that it was not arrogance. It was experience. He told them about humans climbing mountains, knowing they might fall, about sailors braving storms, knowing the sea could swallow them, about explorers who set foot on hostile lands, knowing they might never return. He told them that fear was real, but it did not rule humans. In fact, it pushed them to do more. The students reacted with disbelief. Some sneered, some whispered that humans must be reckless or insane. Others leaned closer, curious. Despite themselves, the professor tried to dismiss his words, telling the class that such examples were exceptions, not the rule. But there was unease in her tone, for she had not expected this open defiance. Daniel only smiled again, as if her dismissal proved nothing. He leaned back in his seat and let the silence stretch while dozens of alien eyes stared at him, trying to decide if he was mad or if he was revealing a truth they had never considered. The lecture ended not with certainty, but with questions the professor quickly closed the session, dismissing her students with a wave, though her gaze lingered on Daniel, who remained seated, his expression unreadable. Whispers filled the hallways as the students left. They spoke of the human's laugh, the defiance in his voice, and the way it seemed to contradict everything they had been taught about his kind. For the first time, doubt had crept into the fortress of the professor's authority. Daniel finally rose and left the hall, his steps unhurried, his back straight, as if he carried no weight of fear at all. Some of the alien students followed him with their eyes, wondering if he would continue to challenge their understanding of what it meant to be human. None of them could shake the sound of his laugh and the strange, Chill it left behind, it was not the sound of cowardice, but of someone who knew death walked beside him and chose to smile anyway. And though the professor would never admit it aloud, that laugh echoed in her mind long after the hall had emptied, and it marked the beginning of something she could no longer control. The following day, the lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Even before Professor Zayara arrived, the students whispered in their own strange tongues about the human who had dared to laugh in the face of their respected teacher. Some thought it was disrespectful, some thought it was madness. Yet a few carried quiet curiosity, wondering if there might be some hidden truth behind his words. When the professor finally entered, her posture was as rigid as the steel beams of the academy. Her scaled eyes swept across the chamber until they found Daniel seated once again in the back row. Calm and almost amused, as if the storm of whispers around him had no effect, Professor Zayara began her lecture. But there was no hiding the edge in her voice. She spoke about fear as an evolutionary tool. She said every species possessed it in order to survive. She reminded the class that to deny fear was to deny the very instinct that had allowed civilizations to rise. She looked directly at Daniel as she said this, and the students followed her gaze, many expecting the human to remain silent this time. But Daniel did not. Instead, he raised his hand slowly, and the room fell, quiet. With permission granted, he stood, his tall figure contrasting with the varied shapes of alien bodies around him. His voice was steady as he told the professor that she was right about fear being important, but wrong about humans being controlled. By it, he explained that humans did not pretend death was not real. They simply refused to let it decide their choices. He described the countless times in human history when people had faced overwhelming odds, wars, disasters, plagues, yet they pushed forward, sometimes singing, sometimes laughing, even when their chances of survival were slim. The professor's jaw tightened, and she challenged him by asking if this laugh at death was not simply recklessness, if it was not foolish bravery that led to unnecessary suffering. Daniel replied calmly that perhaps to an outsider it looked foolish, but to a human, it was a way to take power away from fear. He told them that when humans laughed, they were not mocking survival. They were mocking the chains that fear tried to place on them. He said laughter in the face of danger was not denial but defiance, a way of saying, "We know you are there, but you will not stop us." The class grew restless. Some students shook their heads, their voices sharp with disbelief. Others leaned forward, unable to look away from the human's calm conviction. One of the larger students, a scaled warrior species, stood up and barked that humans were weaklings pretending to be strong, that if faced with true danger, Daniel would tremble like anyone else. Daniel only looked at him and smiled, a quiet smile that seemed to cut deeper than any insult. He did not answer the challenge with words, only with that same unshaken expression. Professor Zayara realized she was losing her control of the narrative, so she announced that talk was meaningless if not proven. She declared that the academy would arrange a controlled test, one designed to measure how students responded to simulated mortal danger. She said that tomorrow, the class would witness how a human reacted when stripped of words and placed in true peril. Her voice carried authority and finality, and many students applauded the idea, eager to see the human humbled at last. Daniel simply nodded without protest and returned to his seat. After the lecture ended, groups of alien students clustered in the halls, their voices buzzing with excitement and scorn. They predicted the human would fail, that his arrogance would be crushed by reality. Yet a few spoke, more quietly, wondering if perhaps the professor's teachings were not as absolute as they believed. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through the crowd unhurried, his eyes calm, his posture relaxed, as though he carried no concern about the coming trial. Whispers followed him like shadows, some filled with ridicule, others with unease, but none could shake the memory of that laugh. Later, in her private chambers, Professor Zayara paced restlessly, her mind troubled. She told herself she would expose the humans' foolishness once and for all, yet a small part of her questioned why his words unsettled her so much. She had studied human biology. She had memorized their weaknesses. She had lectured about them for decades. So why did one human laugh make her feel as though her knowledge was incomplete? She resolved to crush this doubt tomorrow by proving in front of her entire class that humans were exactly what she had always said: fragile, fearful, and ruled by death. Across the academy, Daniel prepared in silence. He did not seek out allies nor boast about the test ahead. He merely sat by the observation windows, staring at the stars beyond and thinking of home. He knew tomorrow would be important, not just for him, but for every alien who believed humans were cowards, and for every human who would one day walk these halls. He allowed himself a small chuckle once more, soft but genuine, for he knew that whatever awaited him, fear would not be the one in control. Next day dawned with a heavy air of expectation. Throughout the Galactic Academy, students crowded the simulation chambers, eager to witness the test that had been promised by Professor Zayara. The chamber itself was a vast dome lined with projectors, capable of creating illusions so real they could fool even the most disciplined minds. It was used to train soldiers, diplomats, and explorers alike in the art of handling stress and fear. But today it was to serve one purpose: only to strip away the words of a single human and show the galaxy what lay beneath. Professor Zayara stood before her class with authority, her scales glimmering beneath the artificial lights. She announced that the test would begin with escalating scenarios, starting small and growing more intense, each designed to trigger instinctive fear responses. She reminded everyone that fear was not shameful, but natural. She explained that the true measure of a species was how it responded to this primal force. Her eyes locked on Daniel as if daring him to falter. Daniel stepped forward calmly and entered the chamber. The dome sealed shut around him, and the first scenario came to life. The desert of a barren world, stretched out with a burning sun. Overhead heat radiated. From every surface, the projection was flawless. The alien students watching could feel the simulated temperature readings on their instruments, yet Daniel only squinted against the glare and walked forward. His movements steady, unhurried. He did not panic, he did not complain. He simply adapted his stride, conserving energy as though he had walked deserts before. The professor's expression hardened, and she commanded the system to escalate. Suddenly the scene shifted to the icy wastes of a frozen world. Blizzards howled, cutting visibility to near-zero. Winds clawed at Daniel's skin like knives. The temperature dropped to lethal levels, yet Daniel pulled his jacket tighter and grinned faintly. He moved with purpose, bending low against the storm but never stopping. The alien students murmured in disbelief, some of them already shivering at the sight of it. The human was not faltering. He was enduring. Frustrated, Professor Zayara raised the level once more. The chamber transformed into a battlefield. Artillery shells exploded around Daniel. The roar of alien weapons filled the air. Smoke choked the vision of anyone watching as figures of enemy soldiers advanced. Daniel ducked behind cover, then without hesitation surged forward, weaving through chaos, his eyes sharp, his body low. He grabbed one of the illusory weapons and returned fire with precision. The students gasped, for this was not the behavior of a paralyzed creature fearing death. This was the behavior of someone who had seen battle and refused to bow to it. Some students pressed closer against the observation glass, their faces alight with fascination. One whispered that perhaps humans were bred for chaos. Another muttered that maybe their so-called weakness was only half the truth, while others scoffed, calling it luck or programming. But Daniel's steady posture made those words sound hollow. Then came the final escalation. The professor activated a predator program, and the chamber filled with the snarling form of a beast engineered to trigger primal terror across dozens of species. Its massive claws tore into the ground. Its eyes glowed with hunger. The sound of its roar shook the walls. Many of the students flinched and looked away, even though they knew it was only a simulation. But Daniel did not run. He stood tall, meeting the beast with unblinking eyes, and then, to the shock of every witness, he laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that rang louder than the predator's growl. He charged forward instead of retreating, using quick footwork and improvisation to outmaneuver the monster. He grabbed pieces of the environment, turning debris into weapons, striking not with fear, but with grim determination. The fight dragged on, each clash between man and beast resonating through the chamber until finally Daniel drove the projection into the ground, his chest heaving, his body covered in sweat, but his grin still intact. The simulation ended, the beast dissolving into nothing. The chamber fell silent. Not one alien student spoke at first, for what they had seen clashed violently with everything they had been taught about humans. Professor Ziara struggled to find her voice, her mind shaken by the sight of a fragile creature facing down horrors. Without breaking, Daniel emerged from the chamber, and as he walked past the rows of stunned faces, he simply said that humans did not laugh because they were fearless. They laughed because fear was real but powerless when faced head-on. Whispers spread, like fire through the academy. Some were filled with awe, some with disbelief, some with quiet dread that perhaps humanity had been misunderstood from the beginning. And as Daniel walked away, his laughter still echoed in their minds, leaving behind a question that none of them were ready to answer. What kind of species laughs in the face of death, and what would that mean for the galaxy that had judged them so wrongly? The academy had not been the same since the simulation test. Daniel's laugh, in the face of the predator, still echoed through the halls, and no amount of lectures or arguments could silence the doubts that now grew in the minds of the students. Professor Ziara found herself cornered by whispers of uncertainty. Some of her brightest pupils were no longer quoting her words as law, but instead asking questions that unsettled the order she had built for years. She knew she had to regain control if her authority was to remain untouched. So she announced another test this time. No simulation, no illusion. She would bring before the class a living predator captured from a hostile world, a creature whose very presence ignited fear in the minds of most species. She declared that courage could not be measured in projections. It had to be proven in reality. Daniel, who had been listening quietly, only nodded when she told him he would face the creature. He did not argue. He did not demand fairness. He simply agreed, his eyes calm and steady, as if she had asked him to take a walk rather than face a nightmare. The day of the trial came, and the chamber was prepared with reinforced barriers and security measures. The students filled the seats again, their bodies tense, some eager to see Daniel fail, others quietly hoping to see him triumph. Professor Ziara herself could not ignore the twist of unease in her chest as she watched the human step into the arena. Without hesitation, he looked around calmly, stretching his arms once as though preparing for an ordinary task. The gates opened and the predator emerged. It was a towering beast with long limbs ending in jagged claws. Its hide was layered with natural armor that shimmered in the light. Its eyes glowed red with predatory hunger, and its roar rattled the chamber. Several students flinched, one fainted outright, yet Daniel only smirked, shaking his head as if amused at the theatrics. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its claws slicing through the air. Daniel rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. He moved with quick precision, no wasted energy, no panic. His eyes tracked every movement of the beast. He did not attack recklessly. Instead, he waited. Each breath measured, each step placed with intent. The audience could not believe what they were seeing: a fragile human not only surviving, but controlling the pace of the fight. When the predator attacked again, Daniel grabbed a piece of broken panel from the ground, using it as a makeshift shield. He blocked the strike, then shoved forward, knocking the creature off balance. He laughed again, loud enough for the sound to echo across the walls. It was not the laugh of madness, but of someone who had been in this dance before, who had met fear and turned it into fuel. The students whispered nervously, some clutching their seats, unable to look away. Professor Ziara watched every movement, her mind torn between pride in the spectacle and horror at what it meant for her teachings. She had told the galaxy that humans feared death, yet before her stood proof that they did not cower. They challenged it. They mocked it. They grew stronger in its presence. She clenched her hands tightly, refusing to let her doubt show. But the truth pressed against her thoughts like a storm. The predator roared again, this time enraged by the resistance. Daniel met its charge head-on, diving under its claws and striking its softer underbelly. With the piece of metal he carried, he was thrown back against the wall by the force, but he rose quickly. Blood trickling from his lip, yet his grin never faded. He taunted the beast with a whistle, daring it to try again, and the crowd gasped, for this was not desperation. This was confidence born of experience. The fight stretched on, brutal and relentless, but Daniel never surrendered when the creature swiped. He dodged when it roared, he laughed when it charged, he countered, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken, until finally, with one last desperate strike, he drove the shard of metal into the beast's vulnerable neck. The predator staggered, collapsing to the ground with a final roar that shook the arena before going still. Silence filled the chamber. Daniel stood over the fallen creature, breathing hard, his body bruised yet his smile unwavering. He looked at the crowd and said that death had been close once more and still it had not won. He walked out of the arena, leaving the stunned professor and her students to grapple with what they had just witnessed. For the first time, many of them began to believe that perhaps everything they had been told about humans was wrong. And for Professor Zayara, the seed of doubt had grown too large to ignore. Though she still clung to her pride, she knew deep inside that the galaxy had misunderstood humanity, and that misunderstanding might one day cost them dearly. The academy corridors pulsed with whispers after the Predator trial. Daniel's victory had shattered more than just the beast. It had cracked the certainty of knowledge that generations of alien scholars had accepted without question. Students who once mocked him now watched with a mix of awe and fear. Some even avoided his gaze as though his very presence carried the weight of something they could not define. Professor Zayara tried to continue her lectures, but her words rang hollow in the shadow of what everyone had seen. She could feel her authority slipping through her claws like sand. Daniel, meanwhile, remained unchanged. He still walked the halls with calm steps, his expression relaxed, his laughter appearing at unexpected moments. He did not boast of his victory nor demand recognition. He behaved as though nothing unusual had happened, and this made the alien students even more unsettled, for they could not reconcile a being so ordinary in appearance with the defiance he had shown against certain death rumors spread beyond the academy walls, reaching the ears of other instructors, and even the Galactic Council representatives stationed nearby. They debated in private chambers about what it meant for one human to face such danger and prevail. Some feared humans might pose a threat if their nature was misunderstood. Others wondered if humanity might be the allies the galaxy needed in times of crisis. But before these debates could settle, the Academy was thrown into chaos by an event no one had predicted. Deep within, the biological research wing alarms blared. A containment unit had failed, and from it emerged one of the deadliest predators ever captured for study. A beast older and far more dangerous than the one Daniel had faced in trial. It tore through reinforced barriers with savage strength. Its roar echoed across the campus and panic spread like wildfire. Students screamed and scattered. Instructors struggled to organize evacuation, while the security forces rushed to respond. Yet even they were hesitant, for the creature was beyond their control. Daniel had been in the library when the alarm sounded. He stood from his seat calmly while others fled around him. His instincts sharpened, not with fear but with focus. He knew the sound of true danger. He followed the chaos toward the source, moving against the stream of panicked students until he reached the outer ring of the research wing. Smoke and dust filled the air. Injured aliens lay crying out while security teams fired uselessly at the rampaging beast. The predator was massive, its body plated with natural armor, its jaws large enough to crush bone with ease. Its eyes burned with feral hunger as it tore through walls and sent shards of metal scattering. The security squads broke ranks, retreating in terror, for none of their weapons slowed the creature. Daniel surveyed the scene quickly, then stepped forward, drawing the attention of both the fleeing aliens and the monster itself. Students gasped from behind cover as they saw him standing alone against the beast, his hands empty. His posture steady, he shouted at the predator, his voice cutting through the chaos with defiance rather than desperation. When the creature charged, he moved not away but toward it, dodging under its swipe and striking at its softer joints with nothing but debris scavenged from the broken floor. His laugh rang out again, sharp and fearless, echoing against the steel corridors. Aliens who had mocked him days before now watched with wide eyes as Daniel maneuvered. With impossible courage, he pulled an injured student from danger. Even as the predator's claws grazed his back, he shouted for others to run, leading the monster away from the helpless. His body battered, his movements strained. Yet he fought with a relentless will. Security teams could not comprehend how one fragile human could hold ground where entire squads had failed. Professor Zayara arrived at the scene, her eyes wide as she saw Daniel standing bloodied but unbroken between the predator and her terrified students. For the first time, she understood that humans did not laugh because they lacked fear. They laughed because they refused to surrender to it, even when death stared them in the face. Her heart twisted as the foundations of her beliefs crumbled. She had taught that fear ruled humans, yet here was living proof that it did not. The battle raged through shattered corridors until Daniel managed to draw the beast toward a collapsing chamber. He used its rage against it, forcing it into the unstable structure with precise timing. The roof fell, burying the predator beneath tons of debris dust, and silence filled the air. Daniel stumbled, coughing blood on his lips, yet smiling still as he raised a hand to signal the others that the danger was over. The students who had fled now returned slowly. Their expressions changed forever. They no longer saw a fragile creature pretending to be brave. They saw a being who faced death with laughter and fought not just for himself but for those around him. And in that moment even Professor Zayara bowed her head, knowing her lessons had been lies and that the galaxy would need to reconsider everything it thought it knew about humanity. The ruins of the research wing smoldered with smoke and sparks while stunned students and faculty gathered in clusters around the wreckage. Security forces worked to secure the area. But their efforts seemed almost unnecessary now, for the predator that had terrorized the academy lay buried under twisted steel and shattered walls. Silence lingered over the scene, broken only by the distant wail of alarms and the uneven footsteps of Daniel as he staggered out from the rubble, his clothes torn, his skin bloodied, yet his grin still wide, his eyes alive with the same fire that had unsettled them all. The students could not look away from him. Some whispered that no other species would have survived that battle. Others admitted aloud that they would have fled long before the final strike, but Daniel had not only fought, he had stood between the beast and those who could not defend themselves. He had laughed when it roared. He had mocked fear itself. And in doing so, he had rewritten the lesson that the academy had tried to teach. Professor Zayara pushed through the crowd. Her scales dulled with shame as she looked at the human. Her voice caught when she tried to speak, for the truth had crushed her teachings and left her exposed. Daniel leaned against a broken beam, catching his breath, and when the professor demanded to know why he had risked his life when he could have escaped like the others, he only shrugged and said that running would have meant watching others die, and that to him such a fate was worse than death itself. His words struck the listeners harder than any roar from the predator because it revealed the true nature of humanity. They did not fight because they were fearless. They fought because something greater than fear guided them. That night the academy buzzed with restless energy. No one slept easily. The story of what had happened spread like wildfire across the galactic networks. Messages carried the tale to distant systems. Some dismissed it as exaggeration. Others demanded investigation. But among the students who had witnessed it firsthand, there was no debate. They had seen a human stand against death and laugh at it, and no argument could erase that vision. Many of them began to gather around Daniel in the days that followed, asking him questions about his people, listening to stories of explorers who crossed oceans of fire, and climbers who conquered mountains that had killed countless before them. Even those who had mocked him now approached him with a mixture of fear and respect. They wanted to understand how such a fragile body could hold such an unbreakable will. Daniel did not give speeches. He did not call himself special. He only told them that he was not unique, that every human carried the same spark that had carried him through the battle. He told them that on Earth children grew up falling and bleeding, but rising again, that in human culture laughter in the face of hardship was not strange but ordinary, because if they did not laugh they would break. Professor Zayara sat in her chambers listening to the reports from across the galaxy, her pride crumbling. She thought of the years she had spent teaching lies, not out of malice but ignorance. Her people had studied humans, through numbers and biology, but never through spirit. She recalled Daniel's grin when he faced the predator, his steady voice when he spoke of protecting others, and she realized that the galaxy's greatest mistake had been to reduce humanity to fear of death, when in truth their greatest strength was the way they carried it with them as a companion, rather than a master. The Council of Elders soon summoned her, demanding explanations for the disturbance at the academy, and for the conflicting reports spreading among the stars. She stood before them, and for the first time in her career she hesitated to speak with certainty. She confessed that perhaps their understanding of humanity was incomplete, perhaps dangerously so. Her words shocked the chamber. But she could not bring herself to lie any longer. Daniel had shown her something that no research could deny. Meanwhile, Daniel walked the academy grounds quietly, his body still healing but his laughter still present. He was no hero in his own mind, only a man who had done what was necessary. Yet to the eyes of those around him, he had become something far more a living challenge to the truths they once held unshakable. The students who followed him began to mirror his ways. Some even tried to test themselves against controlled fears, finding new strength within themselves. And so slowly the academy began to change. But beyond the walls of the campus, the galaxy stirred in unease, for if one human could do this, what might an entire species of them achieve? Whispers of caution and whispers of fear spread alike, for Daniel's laughter had reached far beyond the academy and carried with it a message that death was not the end of courage but the beginning of it, and that revelation threatened to reshape the balance of power in ways none could yet imagine. The final weeks at the Galactic Academy passed under a new light of awareness. The human who had once been dismissed as fragile had become the center of every whisper, every conversation, every private debate among the students and the faculty alike. Daniel had not asked for this place of importance, yet it followed him everywhere he went. His laugh lingered in the corridors like a memory that refused to fade, even as the wounds from his battle with the predator slowly healed. He carried himself the same as before, calm, unshaken, and always ready with a quiet grin that made those around him wonder what truth still lay behind his eyes. Professor Zayara had changed as well. The certainty that once marked her lectures was gone, replaced with a humility that surprised many of her students. She no longer spoke of humans as a species bound by fear of death. Instead, she asked her class questions. She encouraged debate. She admitted that her knowledge had been flawed for the first time in her long career, and though it bruised her pride, it also freed her from the cage of false certainty. The academy had become a place not of rigid teachings but of discovery, and it was Daniel's presence that had caused it. One day, the council representatives arrived at the academy to see the human for themselves. They had heard the stories spreading across the galaxy, but they wanted proof with their own eyes. Daniel stood before them in the great hall, not dressed in ceremonial robes or armor, but in the same simple clothes he always wore. He did not bow or tremble before their authority. Instead, he greeted them with the same casual tone he used with everyone else. The counselors asked him why he had risked his life in battles he could not possibly win, and why he laughed when death was close. Daniel's answer was simple. He said that fear was real, but it was never stronger than the will to protect others. He said that death was not the enemy. It was a reminder that time was short, and that what one did with it mattered. His words unsettled the council more than any roar of a beast could. They were used to power measured in armies or technology. But here was power that came from spirit alone, and they realized it was something the galaxy had overlooked for too long. They questioned him further, but every answer carried the same calm weight. He was not a soldier boasting of strength. He was not a diplomat twisting words. He was simply human, and that was more dangerous than anything they had prepared for. The academy students began to look at him differently, not just as a curiosity but as an example. Some began to train their bodies harder. Others tested themselves in controlled simulations, not to prove superiority, but to face their own fears. Daniel had shown them that courage was not the absence of fear but the refusal to bow to it. Laughter had become a strange new symbol within the academy halls. When a student stumbled in training, others would laugh not in cruelty but in defiance of failure. The culture itself began to shift piece by piece. Professor Zayara watched all this unfold with a mixture of awe and unease. She knew the galaxy would not accept this change easily, for entire doctrines were built on the idea that humans were weak and controlled by fear, and yet she also knew that truth could not be silenced forever. She approached Daniel one evening as he sat by the observation window staring at the stars. She asked him if all humans were like him, if they all laughed when death approached. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then said softly that he was nothing special, that on Earth laughter in darkness was common, that his people had lived on a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had learned long ago that if they did not laugh they would never endure. The professor felt a chill at his words, for she realized the galaxy had not yet seen the full truth of humanity. It had only glimpsed a single spark, and even that had been enough to shake their foundations. She thanked him quietly, though the words tasted strange on her tongue, and for the first time Daniel gave her a smile that was not mocking, but genuine. Not long after Daniel prepared to leave the academy, his time as an exchange student complete the day of his departure. The great hall was filled with students and faculty waiting to see him off. Many of them had once doubted him, but now they looked upon him with respect, even reverence. The air was heavy with emotion. When Daniel stood before them for the last time, he looked across the crowd and said that he hoped they had learned something, not about humans but about themselves. He told them that death would always be a shadow, but that they should never let it silence their laughter. His voice rang through the hall, not with arrogance but with warmth. When the transport ship lifted off, carrying him back toward his homeworld, the Academy remained silent for a long time, as if trying to hold on to the last echoes of his presence. Professor Zayara turned to her students and admitted openly that she had been wrong. She declared that from that day forward, the study of humanity would no longer be about weakness, but about resilience. The galaxy would know that humans did not fear death as others believed. They faced it with a smile and often with a laugh. And so the legend of the human who laughed at death spread beyond the Academy to the farthest stars. It became a story told in hushed tones in council chambers and shouted loudly in training yards, a story that unsettled the powerful and inspired the young. For it carried a truth that could not be denied, that humanity was not fragile but fierce, not ruled by fear, but defined by defiance. And though Daniel returned to his world, his laughter remained across the stars as a reminder that when death comes close, humanity does not bow. It laughs and rises again. The stars over the Academy burned bright the night after Daniel departed. Yet within the halls there was a strange emptiness, a silence that no lecture or routine could fill. The students wandered the corridors, remembering the sound of his laughter, the defiant echo that had carried them through fear and danger. Many of them now walked, taller than before, carrying within themselves the seed of something new, the strength to face fear without bowing to it, and the courage to laugh, even when shadows pressed close. Professor Zayara stood alone in the great hall, where once she had declared humans fragile and ruled by death. She gazed upon the empty seat at the back row where Daniel had so often sat with that calm expression, and she felt the sting of her own mistakes. She had built her reputation on certainty, yet it had been shattered by one human laugh in the face of her truth, and though it wounded her pride, it also freed her. She finally saw that knowledge was not about clinging to absolutes, but about discovering what could not be measured in flesh and bone. Messages from across the galaxy arrived daily, carrying questions about the human who had stood against predators and chaos alike. Daniel's name spread, not as a soldier, nor as a conqueror, but as a reminder that humanity carried something dangerous and beautiful in equal measure and unwillingness to let fear rule them. His story traveled further than the Academy, faster than the Council could control it, until even distant colonies whispered about the species that laughed when others would weep and stood firm when others would fall. Among the students, laughter began to hold a new meaning. It no longer sounded careless or mocking, but strong and unyielding. When trials came, they remembered the human and his fearless grin. They remembered that courage was not the denial of fear, but the refusal to kneel before it. Professor Zayara saw her pupils change, and she knew the galaxy itself would one day follow. For humanity had been underestimated, and now the truth was spreading like a fire that could not be contained on his homeworld. Daniel walked the familiar soil again, yet he carried with him the weight of what he had left behind. He had not gone to the Academy to become a symbol, yet he had returned as one. He told his people that the galaxy did not yet understand them, but that it would soon enough, for fear was a language humanity had learned to twist into strength. And laughter was the anthem they carried into every unknown horizon. And so the tale of the student who laughed at death became legend, repeated in countless forms across countless worlds. Some called it foolish, some called it madness, but those who listened closely understood. It was the very essence of survival. It was the heartbeat of a species born on a world that never forgave weakness and yet forged strength in every wound. Humanity was no longer seen as fragile. Humanity was no longer dismissed. They were seen as something to be reckoned with, something to be feared, and something to be admired. When the stars shifted and the galaxy moved forward, the memory of that laugh remained a sound that promised no matter how close death came, no matter how dark the void grew, humanity would Not bow, they would rise with fire in their hearts and laughter on their lips, and that truth would echo forever through the endless night. The end.